Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 25 episodes of Better Call Saul. So this video is a part of a series of videos I'm doing where I reviewed every season of Better Call Saul, going over every episode of every season. I have finished my coverage of Better Call Saul, and as I was watching the show, I was keeping track of which episodes I liked the best, making a little list, and was able to form a list of my top 25 favorite episodes of Better Call Saul. So this video is going to be as long as it, as it is. So we're going to ramble on for as long as I want. It's kind of not meant to be a short and succinct video, but a celebration of concluding my coverage of Better Call Saul. Of course, I had a huge break in between season 5 and season 6, a year break, because I did seasons 1 through 5 before season 6 aired, and waited a year after season 6 aired. And just finished it last month, so now wrapping it up with a top 25 favorite episodes. So, usually when I do these season-long reviews, season-by-season reviews, I finish off with a top best episodes and worst episodes. However, some shows I don't do worst list because there's not really that many bad episodes, and Better Call Saul is definitely one of those shows. Very similar to Breaking Bad and BoJack Horseman, where there's only mediocre episodes, and it's not worth making a worst list just for a bunch of mediocre episodes which aren't really that bad. So just gonna do the best list, and also similar to Breaking Bad and BoJack Horseman, the best list rates very, very highly. I have a lot of episodes that rate very high, so I go through each episode as I watch it and give it a rating between 1 and 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. And this is, I believe, the second countdown I've done where every single episode in my countdown gets a rating of either 9 or 10. I believe maybe Breaking Bad was that way, I can't recall, but I do know BoJack Horseman was that way. In fact, I think I had 30 episodes for BoJack Horseman, and they were all 9 and 10s, which is not always the case, because there's other shows I've done like Voyager and Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine and whatnot, where there were some 7s and some 8s in my top countdown. But for this one, goes to show how much I love this show, Better Call Saul, that all of them rate very, very highly. So I'm gonna go through, and there'll be a rating card that will pop up before I go through each of the different episodes that are rated. Of course, in this episode, this video is just going to be 9 and 10s, but that little card will pop up telling you when the 9 rated episodes, and then when there's the 10 rated episodes. And also, I'm doing something special for this video, since this is such a show with such good dialogue and good acting, that I'm going to start each of my entries on my list by playing a quote from the episode. So let's go ahead and get started.
One leg each. It's tough, but it's fair.
Right, lay him out. Ain't got all day. It's hotter shit out of here.
Number 25 is Miho. So we begin my countdown with the very second episode of the show. I was going to say first, but it's not technically the first. But I remember when this first aired, they aired these first two episodes together. So I kind of think of both of these as the first episode. But chose the second one, Miho, over the first one because I think this... It's got Tuco in it, and the scenes with Tuco, pretty funny or interesting. With Saul having to bargain, and at first, shows how crazy Tuco is that he thinks that Saul's an undercover agent. But then we meet Nacho, it's a good introduction to Nacho, where he's the reasonable one. And later, they'll get more into how Nacho had to put up with the crazy Salamancas, where he was like the smarter, who's kind of the brains behind the Salamancas, and he was able to sort of tell that Saul was, or that Jimmy was actually telling the truth, and that he made up some story about being an FBI agent because Tuco was threatening to torture him and cut off his fingers. And then Nacho even pointed this out to him. And then, of course, there's the skateboarding guys, where we got the whole scheme from the previous episode. And it just showed how Jimmy was able to talk Tuco down, because Tuco was going to kill him. And he, was terrified. Obviously, was terrified of the situation, but was still couldn't help himself. But tried to negotiate with him and try to save their lives, and he was able to talk them down to just breaking their legs. And it's funny because the scene where he takes the two skateboard kids to the hospital, and they're like, "You're the worst lawyer ever," and he says, "I just talked you down from a death sentence to 6 months probation. I'm the best lawyer ever." And that's true. And this is why, now, obviously Jimmy is still got some of his slipping Jimmy-ness in him, and still wants to scam, the whole running a scam with the skateboarders to try to get a client. But it does show that he is actually a good lawyer, and that he uses some of his skills of persuasion to help him be a good lawyer. And I think things could have turned out differently, which is why I don't completely agree with the position that Chuck takes on him. But anyway, we get a really good montage, one of my favorite montages, where Jimmy goes back to court and has a public defender, and we get Bill Oakley, who I fucking love this character so much. And there's this quote that he says in this episode that I always quote to all myself. It always stuck with me, where he says, "Petty with the prior, petty with the prior, petty with the prior," and Jimmy's like, "Oh, come on!" And that to the music, and of course you have Mike in the toll booth, and Jimmy's sort of like getting pissed off because Mike's being strict about the stickers. He's like, "You're a troll," and like just the whole montage thing was really probably one of my favorite montages the show has done. And then that's followed up with Nacho trying to scam the Kettlemans out of their money and going to Saul, but Saul not biting, which it does show, or Jimmy, I should say, at this stage. It does show the vast difference between where Jimmy is at here and where we saw him in Better Call Saul, Breaking Bad. So that was an interesting concept. So it was a good way to start the show, even though I think maybe the tone is a bit misleading and not necessarily where they take the show going forward. But yeah, still pretty solid episode.
Kim, your debt is forgiven, but anything else, that's on you.
All Jimmy and I did was show the situation for what it is. And if you are hiding that from your clients, well, Howard, that's on you.
So number 24 is Slip, an episode from season 3. After Jimmy was could not practice law at this moment, so he's turning to making videos, making commercials for companies, and you see that these musician guys kind of call him out on it. Now, I don't think that Jimmy is necessarily scamming them. Granted, they do point out that they could shoot this commercial themselves for way cheaper. But I think, and so some people may think that Jimmy's being a bit dishonest here, but I think that, like a lot of services, like, you know, places that offer services do charge a lot for that service. And then if you did it yourself, you could do it cheaper. I'm thinking of automobile repair, for example, or changing your oil or something like that, where if you learn how to do it, you can save yourself a lot of money. But part of the deal is the service that they're doing for you, and that's what you're paying for. And so maybe Jimmy, there's an argument to be made that he was charging too much, but I think these guys are still being assholes. I still think the way they were very dismissive of Jimmy, and I was like, "Oh, get out of my store now," and blah. Yeah, I think they were assholes. So I kind of got pleasure, enjoyment when Jimmy scammed him by doing literally doing the slipping Jimmy. He literally slipped. He's like reverted back to his old ways in order to get revenge on them, and that was actually kind of gratifying to see that these assholes were taken down a peg by Jimmy. But why I love this episode so much and why I put it in my countdown has more to do with the scene with Nacho. I think this is one of the most intense scenes of the entire show, where we see Nacho. He hatched this plan to swap Hector's meds for sugar pills in order to kill him, because, you know, Hector is threatening his father's life because he's forcing himself, you know, the criminal business onto his father's business, and his father is not okay. It wants absolutely nothing to do with that, and you see that in this episode where his father rejects Hector at first, and Hector gets really pissed off about it, so he can tell that things are coming to an head. So he comes up with this plan to swap the pills out, and you see him, you know, getting an exact duplicate of the pills and putting, I think he puts ibuprofen in it, which is dangerous for someone with a heart condition, and he's and you see him practicing throwing the pill in the coat, because you see that's what he has to do in order to swap the pills. And this scene where he actually does the swapping was just super, super intense. I think it was one of the most tension-filled scenes, and the actor who plays Nacho just such a wonderful job. It's just, you can see how stressed and how freaked out he is, and that his life actually hangs in the balance, basically, because if Hector finds out what he's doing, if he screws up, Hector would probably kill him in a very horrible way. So, and you can see that on the actor's face, just how freaked out he is over this situation. And when it works, when he actually was managing to throw the pill bottle into the pocket, you can see the huge, like, sigh of relief and how his hands are shaking. It was an amazing scene, and I absolutely loved it. But we also get the scene in this episode with Howard sort of meeting up with Kim after the whole chicanery debacle where they sort of discredited HHM, and Howard sort of having to clean up the mess, and he kind of blames Kim for it, and he tries to do like a power play with her, trying to show, assert power over her when she's at, a business lunch with Mesa Verde, and then so she returns the favor and tries to also assert power over him when he's at a business lunch, and then afterwards he's like, because she tries to pay back the loan that he gave for putting her through law school, and he rips up the check and is furious and is like, I don't need your money and you ruined the company, blah blah, you shouldn't, you have no appreciation for what I did. But then she points out, and again, I'm on Kim's side here. I'm not always, when Kim and Howard have a dispute, I'm not always on Kim's side. Sometimes I think Howard's in the right, but in this particular case, I do side with Kim, because I think Howard was basically choosing Chuck and following Chuck on his personal vendetta, and so it is his own fault that HHM went down or is having issues. It is not Kim's. And she was just sticking up for her friend. So that was a pretty good scene as well. So yeah, it's pretty good episode overall.
You'd go to such lengths to humiliate me?
I did it for Kim. Well, she worked her butt off to get Mesa Verde while you and Howard sat around sipping scotch and chortling. Hamlin, McGill, more like Scrooge and Marley. Kim deserves Mesa Verde, not you, not HHM. She earned it, and she needs it.
Number 23 is Click. This is the season 2 finale. In this episode, we get a follow-up to Mike's feud with Hector Salamanca, where he tries to kill Hector, but then is stopped by a mysterious figure, which we all knew was Gus Fring, who, because very Gus Fringy way, just leaves a note when the car with the horn is constantly beeping to, give his position away, and the note just says, don't. So, very Gus Fring thing to do, so it's a very interesting way to introduce the character into the show, although we don't see him until next season. But the main thing about this episode is Chuck and his little temper tantrum or fit that he had at the copy store when he rightfully noticed that his brother Jimmy was trying to con him, and then was trying to cover his tracks, and he was trying to get the right information from the clerk, but Jimmy had already paid him off, so he freaked out, fell, had to go to the hospital, and then we see how traumatic this is for him, because he doesn't like being around anything electric, and of course they insist on running all these tests that are pulsating with electricity, and so it's kind of horrific, even though you know that this condition is just in his head. It's still, you can see how difficult doing this is for him, and also it shows how Jimmy is still a loving brother, and that's why I don't agree with people who put him down. Yes, he does have this dark side to him. He has this conning side, and yeah, he just conned his own brother in order to help Kim. But I think part of the antagonism between them is definitely Chuck is making it worse, for sure. And he's being very antagonistic to Jimmy, who does have his best interests at heart, because if Jimmy didn't, he could very easily take the doctor up on and just chuck Chuck in a mental institution and be done with him and take over all of his assets, but he doesn't. He actually cares about his brother at this stage, despite all the stuff they've been through, but is not reciprocated on Chuck's part. In fact, Chuck plays a con on Jimmy, and he's actually kind of ironic. I know Chuck, of course, will justify it in his mind, but it's ironic because he criticizes Jimmy for being such a con man, yet Chuck runs a very expert con on Jimmy, and the con is dependent on Jimmy caring about Chuck. So he's using the fact that his brother loves him against him in order to entrap his brother, because he fakes being all, going crazy and putting the space blankets all over the wall and having the electricity thing like really go into overdrive, when in fact that the opposite is true. He's actually getting a bit better, and he calls Howard to resign, and Howard wasn't even in on it, so Howard thinks it's genuine, but it's all part of an act to get Jimmy to come over and confess, because Chuck is like, oh, I lost my touch, I actually put the wrong number down, where Chuck knows full well that Jimmy conned him, and so he tricks Jimmy into admitting it. And it was a really powerful moment when the show revealed this, because you didn't know that Chuck was conning Jimmy until Jimmy leaves, and he pulls out the videotape and stops it and clicks it. And so yeah, it was really powerful, and it was really interesting, but it also really shows the complex relationship that these two brothers have.
You have to work together. It's what the boss wants.
The boss can sock me.
I'd watch what I say if I were you.
Who you think you are? You should be kissing my ass right now. Me and my family, we built this whole business.
We all did together.
No! Salamanca did. Salamanca money. Salamanca blood.
You have to calm down.
That hacienda, I pay for it. And you treat us like dogs.
Hector, this isn't personal.
It is. It is personal.
So yes, my number 22 is Lantern, which is the season finale of season 3. The episode in which Chuck dies. Quite a powerful episode, because it begins with Chuck trying to sue Howard in order to get back into HHM, because the insurance had raised the rates ridiculously because of Chuck's outburst, and so Howard had kind of forced Chuck into retirement because the company couldn't afford to have him around, and Chuck didn't take too kindly for this because he wanted to continue being a lawyer, so he sued HHM with the hopes, and he even goes there like being all condescending and being like, look, there's 3 options. We can go to court and battle this out, and nobody wants that, or you can pay me off, which you can't afford to pay him because he's a partner. You can't afford to buy him out. Or the third option is, hey, we just forget this whole thing. I come back to work and everything's all good. And he puts his hand in front of Howard to shake it, and I love the way Howard just looks at his hand and it's just like, hey, everyone, can you give us the room for a second? And finds out that, Chuck's condescending is not earned, because you find out that Howard would rather buy Chuck out than have him go back to work. And that he's using his own money to do so. So he's paying millions of dollars out of pocket in order to buy Chuck off. And he feels very betrayed by Chuck. Which he points out, and he and I think they're both right and wrong in certain places. Like, Howard is definitely right that Chuck risked the company on a personal vendetta, which is true. He let his personal feelings about his brother get the better of him and sort of affect the company, and so I would understand why he would want Chuck to retire. But on the other hand, he says to Chuck, oh, I just suggest that perhaps you should retire, and your reaction is to sue me. That's not an accurate description, though, is it, Howard? He didn't suggest that he retired. He forced him into retirement. So I can kind of see Chuck's point of view, where he's actually getting better and getting over his disease, and at the same time, Howard's trying to force him into retirement. And of course, we as the audience know, even though both these characters aren't aware of it, that this whole thing with the insurance was only brought up because of Jimmy purposely did this to get back at Chuck. And it's interesting because he keeps this to himself, and it never comes up ever again until the finale, where he confesses to that, and it has been one of the worst things that he did, because as we see, him going to the insurance led to Chuck getting forced into retirement, and Chuck getting forced into retirement led to Chuck committing suicide. And so yes, even though Jimmy wasn't directly the cause of Chuck's death, he was indirectly the cause of his death, and something that he'll be in denial about and for the next few seasons until the very end of the show. And so yeah, that was a very powerful moment. But then you also have the storyline with Hector Salamanca, who we all know from Breaking Bad is going to end up in the wheelchair somehow, but we saw, Nacho hatch the plan to switch the pills, and then we see this come to fruition, where his feud with Gus comes to a head with Juan Bolsa of the cartel trying to get the two to make peace, but he has a huge fit where he's like screaming and yelling, and it ends with him having a heart attack and him being rushed to the hospital, and Nacho picking up the pills, and Gus, the ever observant person, noticing this. Which is really, really powerful. And that storyline, of course, is great to get the backstory of how Hector ended up in the chair with the bell, the ringy bell.
Kim. Come on, Jimmy. You need me. You can't argue this yourself. You and I both know that, and I'm not going to let you fight this on your own.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I don't... Why would you... Come on. This guy? Seriously?
Let's just call it the fallacy of sunk costs.
Alright, so number 21 on my list is sunk costs. This is quite a clever episode. So this is an early episode of season 3, which deals with Jimmy being arrested because Chuck played another entrapment, or trapped him again to get him to try to destroy the tape and assault him, basically, and have a huge outburst, and then arrested him for that. And we find in this episode that Chuck doesn't want Jimmy in jail. He just wants to take his law license because they came up with a deal, and he's very kind with the DA and makes a little deal that, we can forgo this. We don't have to put Jimmy in jail. He's just misunderstood. But he has to write a letter to the Law Review confessing to a felony which would disbar him and make him ineligible to be a lawyer going forward. So, and that makes complete and total sense. This is something that was made very clear from the end of season 1, that Chuck does. His biggest issue with Jimmy is that he doesn't believe he should be a lawyer. And we see at first Kim trying to help Jimmy out as he's, has to go forth in front of a judge, and Jimmy refuses to let her help, and later, he goes to her and says, this is my issue, this is my fault, this is my issue. And I like how he even admits Chuck played me like a fiddle, and he's like, I'm owning my mistake, and I don't want to bring you down with me. which was actually also really powerful. And plus, we get another Bill Oakley appearance where he sees Jimmy in jail and then sort of taunts him about it. But then at the end of the episode, once Jimmy finds out what Chuck's plan is, and that he is trying to go for his law license, that Kim kind of insists, no, you absolutely need my help. And when Jimmy is like, why would you help him? And she brings up the sunk cost fallacy, which I think was mentioned maybe earlier in the episode or in an earlier episode, which is something I always think about, the sunk cost fallacy, that once you put in a lot of effort into something, that you just continue doing it even though it might not be the smartest thing to continue doing it because you believe you put in sunk cost. Biggest example of this is someone gambling at a casino. While they already spent all this money gambling, they got to keep going in because they have sunk cost. So I love that concept, and I think it's a pretty strong episode. Oh, we also get, need I forget, Mike's storyline where he first hooks up with Gus. We see him, we had this, game of cat and mouse between Mike trying to figure out who Gus is for the 2 previous episodes, but now we finally get to the point in this episode where they meet face to face, and Mike at first refuses to work for Gus, but then Gus sort of insists that if you want to keep, you can't kill Hector, but if you want to keep disrupting his business and hurting him, I'd be perfectly okay with that. And so they come up with a plan to sabotage Hector by planting cocaine on one of his trucks on the way to the border. So when it goes into customs, which we've had this nice little scene of them going customs in the previous seasons, and here they play that same music, whatever, but this time they get caught and arrested, and it was all Mike's doing. So that was pretty cool too.
First, you contact every person you've ripped off. Tell them you made an accounting error. Tell them you're crooks who had a change of heart. I don't care. Give them what they are legally owed. Everything you stole. And then after that, you're going to forget you ever heard the name Howard Hamlin. I'm keeping my eye on both of you. You think you've lost everything? You have no idea.
So number 20 is Carrot and Stick, season 6 episode. That's, well, first of all, we get the Nacho storyline where he's still on the run. He's hiding out at a hotel because Gus's men told him to hide there in Mexico after, Lalo was attempted on Lalo's life. So he's hiding from the Salamancas, but he can tell that something's up, something's wrong, and so he figures out that a man is watching them, and he figures out it's in fact Gus's man who's watching them, and figures out that Gus does not intend for him to leave Mexico alive. But he he gets in a shootout with the Salamanca twins, and that was pretty intense, but manages to get away. But with Jimmy and Kim, we get the storyline of them continuing their con on Howard, and this time they enlist the Kettleman's help, and they sort of con them into going to Cliff in order to get Cliff suspicious of Howard being a drug addict. But then the Kettlemans realize that they had been played, and so, Jimmy and Kim say, should we use the carrot or the stick? And Jimmy, it's funny because Jimmy's the nice guy in this situation. He's a good cop. He wants to use the carrot. He tries to give them money. He tries to pay them off. But of course, they're very indigent and annoying, as they always are, and refuse to cooperate. And so Kim brings out the stick, which was a very powerful moment. It really showed that Kim can really mean fucking business and you don't fuck around with her when she threatened to have them both thrown in jail for the cons that they're running on their tax frauds that they're doing. And so, but Jimmy gives them the money anyway. So that was a really good episode too.
Jimmy, this is insane.
It's just little old me and my little old Suzuki Esteem, and there has never been more than $50 in an Esteem in the history of Esteem. So, no one's going to look at me twice.
You sound like you are talking yourself into this.
I will be okay. I swear. If I smell even the faintest whiff of anything wrong, I'll be out of there like a shot.
I don't like this. I don't want you to do it.
Number 19 is Bagman from season 5. Now, a lot of people may have this in their top 10 or top 5. I think it's in my top 20, so I think it's a great episode. Definitely gave it a 9 out of 10. Not quite top 10 material for me because it is more sort of action orientated than most episodes of Better Call Saul are. And a lot of it does involve like Saul and Mike just wandering through the desert, which I think those scenes drag for a bit. But, as I said, still love this episode. It's still in my top 20 because it is intense. Jimmy agrees to collect $7 million and bail money to get Lalo out. And Juan Bolsa very misguidingly hires mercenaries to kill Jimmy and steal the money because he wants Lalo to remain in jail, not realizing that Gus's plan is for them to break Lalo out of jail and get him to Mexico so he can kill him because Lalo is still causing issues for Gus even while he's in jail. And so this leads to, Jimmy running for his life and Mike protecting him in the desert. And yeah, all that was super intense. And then Kim worried sick about him and even going to Lalo, which is a huge mistake because she reveals to him who she is, which will come back to bite her in the ass later on. But it just shows how deathly worried she was, and I think it was played very well in a very powerful episode. Of course, Jimmy having to drink his own pee, and eventually allows himself to be used as bait so Mike can kill the remaining gunman. It's a pretty powerful episode.
Do it one more time. You sure you can take it?
I can if you can.
All right, you asked for it. Hello there. Look at your hard shell and find forgiveness. Let us take you on a trip down to New Orleans way, where to put a little extra roux in the gumbo. Woo, that's a beautiful red snapper. It's wonderful, I guarantee.
Wow, it's like I'm in the bayou.
Yes, well, I got crawdads in my pants.
All right, so number 18 on my list is Kilshata. This mostly is a funny episode, although it's also really, I think it's some episodes of Better Call Saul can be a bit more comedic than others, but they're all sort of very clever and very witty and very good character stories. And this is one that was probably airs more on the comedic side because Huel was arrested and they're trying to get him off, and Jimmy, of course, is not a lawyer at this stage, so he hires Kim to defend Huel. And Kim starts to take it personally when the prosecutor refuses to take any deal. In fact, she thinks he's being completely unfair to Huel, so they team up and run a con to make it seem like there's a huge church group that wants to save Huel, but of course it's all a con. They get random people to write letters, and then they have Jimmy, who has a whole bunch of different phones, so that when the prosecutor calls one of the phones, he pretends to be someone else, and then he's pretending to be this New Orleans priest, which is absolutely hilarious. And I agree, he gets the film students to help. Of course he does. And so that aspect of it was genius. It was absolutely hilarious. And then we see, and at the end, Jimmy goes to Kim and is like, look, there was a bad thing we did, you probably didn't like it, and because he thinks that Kim is against these cons, because historically she has been, but we see that she's starting to get more sort of seduced by doing them, and in fact was like, hey, let's do it some more. That she said she really liked it. And we also see here, as we also see in future episodes, how sort of hot she gets for Saul whenever they pull off a con like this. So it does start to show their sort of unhealthy relationship, that she gets very lustful with him whenever they con, but when he's not conning or just being ordinary, she starts to get bored with him. So you get that interesting dynamic in as well.
Since you're not picking up what I'm putting down, I'll explain it to you. Nebraska, although they both begin with the letter N, actually turns out to be a different state than New Mexico. So your client accepted shipments across state lines for its enterprise. In the U.S. mail, no less.
Are you trying to make this a RICO case? Like our client is John Gotti or something?
Yeah. You know as well as I do, RICO's used mostly for business beefs. Sedema establishes a pretty low threshold for RICO provisions to kick in. Interstate commerce is a bitch, huh?
Number 17 is Rico. This is a first season episode that I've always liked, probably more than most people. It's more of a straightforward, like, sort of court or law type episode, but it shows Jimmy as, like, and it has some humor to it, like the Better Call Saul-esque humor, but it shows Jimmy is actually a good lawyer, again. Because it deals with his clients in the nursing home, and he starts to realize that they're being defrauded by said nursing home. And so we get the scene where he is getting kicked out of the nursing home, and he goes to use the bathroom, and he writes like a letter, cease and desist letter, on toilet paper, because he can see that they're like shredding documents and whatnot. And then this is when we're introduced to the character of Rich, who will remain a recurring character for the rest of the show, but here he's like the, suave, very intimidating defense attorney defending the huge corporation that Jimmy wants to go after. And yeah, the scene where Jimmy goes in the dumpster to retrieve all the stuff that they shredded, and he pretends to be out of play when he's talking to Rich on the phone, and what does he say? The magic flute, and Rich ends the conversation with, enjoy the magic flute, and he's like, suck on my magic flute or something like that. But what I find most interesting about this episode is that we actually see Jimmy and Chuck work together as a team. So this is like a snippet of what could have been, in my opinion. Now, I know everyone has sort of a different opinion or different perspective on the Jimmy and Chuck relationship. Some people side more with Chuck, some people side more with Jimmy, some people think they're both sort of equally right and wrong. I side more with Jimmy, and I always have, even though there are some instances where Chuck is justified and where Chuck is actually correct, that Jimmy is not acting in the best regard. But I think if Chuck would have just given Jimmy a chance and actually not held this jealousy over him from their childhood, that things could have actually turned out way better between the two of them. And you get a glimpse of that in this episode where they're actually working together. Jimmy kind of cons Chuck into doing the paperwork for him by leaving it there because he knows at Chuck's house, because he knows that Chuck couldn't resist doing it. But they work together on this case to crack this case wide open. And the way Jimmy confronts Rich, again, doing a really good job, being a good lawyer, really sticking it to Rich and saying that this is a RICO case. And then Chuck even becomes even more intimidating, and you can tell that Rich is intimidated by Chuck because he knows how great of a lawyer he is, and when he brings up, $20 million, he's like, what? It's a great moment. And I feel like, Chuck should have realized, yes, Jimmy has his issues, he does have his conning tendencies, but if he would work with him to overcome that, and focus on the good aspects of, and notice that Jimmy is being a good lawyer. There's episodes like this and previous episodes that show he can be a good lawyer. And as we learn in the next episode, Chuck is being completely unfair. And as we learned throughout the seasons, probably mostly due to jealousy and childhood anger that he had towards his brother growing up that he just can't let go of. And it's sad that Chuck wasn't able to let go of it. You can see that he did let go of it in this episode, but then towards the end, once Chuck realizes this is going to be a long-term case, that they need to bring HHM on it, and Jimmy starts talking about, then I'll have an office right next to yours. And you can see, nice foreshadowing, how bothered Chuck is by this, and then so he lets his prejudice towards Jimmy and get the better of him, and believe that he's a no good con artist and should never be a lawyer. And if he hadn't had that feeling, things would have turned out very differently for Jimmy. Not that I blame Chuck entirely, because again, as I said, there's some faults of Jimmy still. There's some things that he does wrong as well, but if Chuck would have given him a chance, they could have worked through it, in my humble opinion.
You know this has to change. If you don't see it, I don't know what to say, because we are at a breaking point.
God.
Either we end this now, and enjoy the time we had and go our separate ways, or we're...
What?
Or we're I mean... Or maybe... Maybe we get married.
So number 16, Wexler v. Goodman. So this pretty powerful 5th season episode where Kim and Jimmy come up with a con in order to get Kevin from Mesa Verde to leave this guy alone, and sort of to get back at him, because you can tell how unhappy Kim is finding life working for this corporate asshole who plagiarized this Native American's photograph and is just kicking this guy off his land and being really an asshole about it. And so Kim wants to sort of brought in Jimmy. It was her fault. She brought in Jimmy, and they come up with this con, and then she starts to have second thoughts. She can tell that Rich is kind of questioning the fact that her husband is involved in this case. Or, no, they're not married yet. Her boyfriend, partner, is involved in this case. And so she calls the whole thing off, and then Jimmy goes ahead and does it anyway without her permission, and which was a pretty awesome scene. How he was conning Kevin, having him, slandering his father and whatnot, and then Kim and Rich were both like, "Don't respond to this. Don't watch it. Don't, and is very adamant to Kevin's like, we can deal with this, do not capitulate to Saul, but he goes in private and capitulates to him and against their advisement, and then Saul's acting like, oh, hey, everything's great, our plan worked, hey, and Kim's not having it. She is not on board with being betrayed, but Jimmy's reasoning was, well, you were worried that Rich thought you were in on it, and there's no way he can think this down because that was real anger. She's like, yeah, fucking A, that was real anger. And she threatens to leave him, but instead, her alternative solution is to get married, which is a very interesting way to conclude that episode. Meanwhile, with the Mike and Gus storyline, we see Mike, I wanted to say meet Nacho for the first time because they already knew each other, but Nacho finds out that Mike is working for Gus, which he did not know before this, and Mike actually becomes Nacho's sort of point of contact. And Nacho tries to convince Mike about, hey, this guy has a gun to my father's head. This is the asshole you're working for. And Mike's just like, yeah, don't worry about this. Let's get rid of the Lalo issue at the moment because Lalo is viciously attacking Gus's business, and they need to do something about it. So they come up with a plan to plant evidence to point to Lalo, point the police in the direction of the murder he did actually commit. But Mike has to sort of pretend to be an undercover or to pretend to be an FBI agent or whatever to go to the witness to get them to go forward with the more information that he's giving her in order to get Lalo arrested, who is then promptly arrested. So that aspect was also very interesting.
I got a feeling about this. This Heisenberg guy's got something. It's top of the line product. That's the buzz on the street, and I just think with the right management.
Years ago, I bought a Betamax. Good product, top of the line. Experts said it was better than a VHS. Turned out to be a complete waste of time and money. Let it go.
Guy with that mustache probably doesn't make a lot of good life choices.
So number 15 is Breaking Bad. So the 6th season episode, which, follows the Gene storyline towards the end of season 6, where he is Breaking Bad again. He's, he pulled a con with that cab driver, Jeff, and his friend, and they could have left it at that, and that was his plan, to just leave it at that and go back to his quiet life, but no, he's getting too enticed by this lifestyle. But more to the point, he gets in contact with, what's her name? The receptionist that he worked with. And then she tells him about Kim, so he thinks it's a great idea to call Kim, who's apparently living in Florida. And we don't see what happens in the phone call, but we see it does not go well. And this directly leads to him wanting to pull more cons with Jeff. And so this makes a lot of sense for Saul's character. It's a very sort of give and take relationship with Kim whenever they sort of have issues. It sort of causes him to want to be worse. And so he ends up scamming like these asshole businessmen, going home and stealing their identity and whatnot and making money off of that. But then things get worse when the guy that he's scamming is actually not an asshole. He's a really nice guy. He has cancer, and so his partners refuse to be involved in this, but Saul's like so obsessed he wants to do it anyway, and it's a detriment. It's definitely a downfall that he's letting his obsession and his anger over what happened with Kim get the better of him and drive him to do very dangerous and stupid things. And we get this juxtaposed by flashbacks of when Saul first met Walter White and Jesse, and the episode Better Call Saul from Breaking Bad, and this is the episode Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Nice symmetry. And we see that Jimmy is actually, or Saul, is going against Mike's advice of not getting involved with Walter White and leaving it be, but Saul sees like a fresh mound of clay that he could shape into this big warlord and make tons of money off of him by being this, criminal lawyer, crime boss lawyer, whatever you want to call him. And we juxtapose the scene with Saul going through, or Gene going through the con that is too dangerous and he should let go, with Saul going up to Walter White and going forward with this, and we know where that leads. So that was very powerful, and of course, as always, it was great to get the appearance of Walter and Jesse in the show as well.
I told him I did it too. That I was like Hoffman, getting by, and that's what you heard that night. Me talking him down, him kicking and screaming until the fight went out of him. He put me up on a pedestal. And I had to show him that I was down in the gutter with the rest of them. Broke my boy. I broke my boy.
So number 14, 5-0, season 1 episode that is the Mike-centric storyline. I remember when this episode first came out, I wasn't that big of a fan of it because it seemed to, the show seemed to switch focus from Saul to Mike very suddenly, but then they've kept with this format going back and forth between Jimmy and Mike, and so I've kind of gotten used to this format now. But moreover, it's a very powerful backstory. It was kind of alluded to in Breaking Bad that he alluded to some reason of why he left Philadelphia, and you could sense that there was a big story to be told there, and we get that story in this episode and find out it's actually a powerful one where the police that he used to work with from Philadelphia show up in Albuquerque and interrogate him, accuse him of being involved in these murders, and we slowly disseminate and get the backstory that apparently his son was a cop, and all the cops were dirty, and Mike himself was also dirty, and his son was refusing to be dirty though, but Mike knew that would put his life in danger, so convinced him to take the bribes. But it was too late, and the partners that he was working with already didn't trust him, so decided to kill him. And so Mike, we get this really cool scene, Mike pretending to be drunk and expertly trapping those two asshole cops that killed his son and killing them. Very powerful. And of course he gets shot, and at the start of the episode when he arrives in Albuquerque, he's shot, and so we see that's how he got shot. And he uses Jimmy in this scene to sort of, and at this stage, again, Jimmy doesn't want to spill coffee on the cop, doesn't want to do it. He wants to be above board. He wants to be a legitimate lawyer and is resisting his conning aspects, which again is something Chuck's not taking into account. Hello. But because Chuck gave up on Jimmy eventually becomes all for doing cons like this. Like you see him in Breaking Bad, he would love to do something like this. But anyway, the scene where Mike confesses all this to his daughter-in-law was fucking brilliant. It was just from the best acting on this show.
You know why I didn't take the job? Because it's too small! I don't care about it. It's nothing to me. It's a bacterium. I travel in worlds you can't even imagine. You can't conceive of what I'm capable of. I'm so far beyond you. I'm like a god in human clothing. Lightning bolts shoot from my fingertips.
So yeah, number 13 is JMM, which was Jimmy McGill's initials. that Kim had gotten a briefcase for him with that carved on it, not realizing that he was changing his name to Saul Goodman. And so he said he'd tell people that it means justice matters most. But Lalo didn't think that motto was appropriate for him and said that it instead should be just make money. So this deals with the aftermath of Lalo getting arrested, and he enlists Jimmy to get him on bail. That's all he wants, is to post bail so he can skip out, go to Mexico. And Jimmy thinks that this is a near impossible task. However, when Mike is talking to Nacho, and Nacho wants to be set free from Gus, and he says that Lalo isn't the problem anymore, but then Nacho reveals that Lalo is ordering him to burn down Gus's chicken restaurant, and so Mike declares, well, he's still a problem then, isn't he? And so they instead want to get him out on bail so they could so he can skip out to Mexico so they can kill him, because him being in jail isn't good enough. So Mike goes to Saul and gives him what he needs to get Lalo out on bail. And this is a very interesting scene because you see that Jimmy, the guilt is still eating at him, and that he's not really okay at this stage of defending straight out murderers, which, as we know, by the time of Breaking Bad he is, but here he's not. And that you see him looking over to the family of the victim that Lalo killed and being very disturbed by this. And you get some really good cinematography shots of like Jimmy sort of hiding in the corner looking at the victim's family and whatnot. And he pulls a classic, slipping Jimmy scheme where he gets, hires a family to come in to pretend to be Lalo's family, so it's proving that he has ties to Albuquerque that he's not going to skip town. And he does manage to post bail, but it's $7 million, which I don't know. I have issues with that. That seems a bit unrealistic, but whatever. So it was still very powerful. And of course, this is the episode where Jimmy and Kim do get married at the start of the episode, where him and Kim just elope with a Huel there, because they don't really see it as romantic, as more of a kind of a business arrangement. But that was very fascinating as well. But then the episode ends with Howard approaching Jimmy. So Howard offered Jimmy a job at HHM, and Jimmy didn't take kindly to it and was playing pranks on him, throwing bowling balls at his car, and hiring prostitutes to show up at Howard's lunch and pretend to be his prostitutes. And he caught on to this fact, and when he ran into Jimmy at the courthouse, is like, what's up with this bullshit? And like, I offer you a job and you send prostitutes over to harass me at lunch. Like, I don't get it. And Jimmy doesn't really react well to this, and when Howard shows pity to Jimmy, that's when Jimmy really sets off. And in Howard's mind, he does feel guilty. He does feel guilty about the part he played with Chuck and sanctioning Jimmy. And he wants to hire Jimmy really as a way to make up for that. And I think he, that is the main reason he does, as for pity, for to ease his guilty conscience. And I think, Saul can tell this and takes offense to this, and because in his mind, well, I'm way better than you, because he's actually moved past, because in the first couple of seasons he wanted to be like Chuck, but he has moved past that, so he actually has no desire to work at HHM, and I think he did find the offer insulting, which is why he reacted the way he did. But then he has this outburst in the courthouse when he says, "You're just a peon. I am a god. I can shoot lightning bolts from my fingers," which was it gets into the psyche of Jimmy. It was a very powerful way to end the episode.
Better Call Saul. Season 3, Episode 9. 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 Better Call We're not talking about a bar trick here. We're talking about scorched earth. We would have to hurt him. Hurt him bad. To get a bunch of lawyers to run for the exits, Howard would have to have done something unforgivable. At the end of it, he might never be able to practice law again. He doesn't deserve that. And who knows if we could pull it off.
So we're now getting into my 10 rated episodes, starting with my number 12, which is the season 5 finale, Something Unforgivable. So this deals with the aftermath of Jimmy and Kim being threatened by Lalo and being terrified of them, so they go spend the night in a hotel. Jimmy just is also, of course, experiencing PTSD due to his time in the desert. So he just wants to hide out all day, but Kim is insistent on returning to work, and she goes back to work in order to continue her focus on her pro bono work, because she has left Mesa Verde at this stage and wants to do primarily pro bono work. And we see how she buries herself in this work, that she's having a kind of duality in this episode of wanting to help people, but at the same time wanting to con people. And then she runs into Howard, who tells her about, how Jimmy was harassing him with the bowling balls and prostitutes and whatnot. And she just thinks it's hilarious. And she definitely has a grudge against Howard. And part of it has to do with the way he mistreated her at HHM, like putting her in doc review when she didn't deserve it back in season 2, which I do agree that he mistreated her. And she thinks that doesn't like the way he handled Chuck's death, and but I think she misread the whole thing with Jimmy and how he handled Chuck's death. But still, she just has a lot of resentment towards Chuck, as you see towards the end of the episode when she comes up with an idea to con Chuck, and in order to get the money from Sandpiper so that she can do her pro bono work full time and have funding for it and not worry about money. So she wants to do a really good thing and help people, but she wants to con and destroy Howard's life in order to accomplish this, although she insists his life won't be destroyed, that he'll be fine. But it's obvious that she wants to hurt him. That part of her intention is. And this is a very interesting moment, because Jimmy is actually very resistant to this. He's like, no, we're not going to do this. Howard doesn't deserve this. Like, he's being the voice of reason. He's being the one we shouldn't, we should behave like legitimate lawyers. And Kim is being the one pushing to, no, let's con them. Let's do this dirty deed. And it is showing, again, the interesting, push and pull of their relationship. And how Kim actually helps Saul become a better person, but Saul in turn makes Kim a worse person. and so that's very fascinating when she gives the finger guns at the end of the episode. It's very powerful. But of course, this episode is also very intense and suspenseful for the cartel storyline, where we see Gus try to execute his plan to execute Lalo, where Nacho is pretending to, be buddy-buddy with Lalo when he's in Mexico and meets Don Ilario, but then is forced, not giving any choice, he's forced to assist Gus in this assassination attempt on Lalo's life, which we see goes sideways as Lalo does get the better of his attackers and eventually fakes his death. But realized he was betrayed by Nacho, and that he knows instantly that Gus is responsible for this. And so, yeah, that was pretty damn powerful as well.
He idolizes you. He accepts you. He takes care of you. And all he ever wanted was your love and support. But all you've ever done is judge him. You never believed in him.
You never wanted him to succeed. And you know what? I feel sorry for him. And I feel sorry for you.
So, number 11 is Nailed, which is a season 2 episode that deals with Jimmy having previously conned Chuck, which we actually see play out because he switched the numbers while Chuck was sleeping on his documents so that he would make a fool of himself in court, which is what we see because Chuck him and Howard kind of stole Mercedes from Kim, which pissed Saul off, and so he did the scheme and got Chuck to embarrass himself in front of Mercedes, who now go running back to Kim because they see Chuck as incompetent, and Chuck, being the sharp knife in the tool shed, instantly recognizes that he'd been played by Jimmy in what he did, and he's in complete denial about this. But he chooses to contact Kim directly and tries to appeal to Kim and let her know what Jimmy did, even though Jimmy denies it. And Kim's response, this is one of my favorite scenes, where Kim just tears into Howard, because, Chuck, because everything she says, I think, is spot on. I think she's 100% correct that Jimmy looked up to Chuck. I keep saying Howard, but anyway, Jimmy looked up to Chuck and wanted his, just wanted his love and wanted his approval. But Chuck absolutely refused to do it and let his jealousy and petty feelings of Jimmy get the better of him. And like when Chuck says, "Oh, you'll always be slipping, Jimmy. You'll never change." Like, I fundamentally disagree with that statement, and I think he's flat out wrong, and there's that attitude that is destroying Jimmy and actually making him worse. And Kim can see this, and she calls him out on his bullshit, and I love it. But what's even better, though, is once she leaves his house and Jimmy and her get in the car, she starts beating the hell out of Jimmy because she knows what Chuck is saying is true. She knows that Jimmy just conned Chuck and was like, "Why the fuck would you?" And she's so pissed off at him for doing something so stupid on her behalf. And that was such a great scene when she just lets him have it. And then later on, when they're lying in bed and he's trying to have casual conversation, and Kim just casually brings up, "Oh yeah, Chuck's very smart," and Jimmy's like, "Yes, the smartest." She's like, if anyone tried to put one over on him, they better make sure they have all their T's crossed and all those I's dotted. They want to make sure they have all their ducks in a row. Nothing for Chuck to find. And you see Jimmy all of a sudden open his eyes as he realizes what she's getting at, and then he slowly gets out of bed and leaves because you see that he did think of something that Chuck could exploit, and that is the worker at the copy shop. But Jimmy does manage to get to him first and bribe him, and of course this doesn't go down well with Chuck, who freaks out and hits his head and has to be taken to the hospital. And then you also get the Mike and Nacho storyline. You get a really interesting scene between the two of them in this episode, where Mike had previously, robbed one of Salamanca's trucks just to try to hurt Hector Salamanca, and he purposely wanted to put the police onto Hector, and Nacho was, figured out that it was Mike who did it, but didn't know exactly why. And in fact, when Nacho finds out that Mike wanted to put the police onto Hector, which would put the police onto him as well because he works for Hector, he gets really pissed off and reaches for his gun. You get a really nice line. I like Mike and his lines where he's like, "You need to calm down and take that hand from that pocket." It was just such a powerful moment. And Mike's like, oh yeah, don't worry, I'm done with Hector. But whatever happened, why it wasn't in the papers though? And Nacho explains that there was a good Samaritan who found the truck driver and went to the rescue, and Hector shot that innocent bystander in the head so that the police and no one even knew about what happened. And so, of course, he's not done with Hector because this fucking pissed him off even more that he killed an innocent person, and it's kind of his fault. And so now he wants to go kill Hector. But yeah, I already covered the episode in which that doesn't work out for him.
As far as they're concerned, your mistake is just, it's who you are. And it's all you are. And I'm not just talking about the scholarship here. I'm talking about everything. I mean, they'll smile at you, they'll pat you on the head, but they are never, ever letting you in. But listen, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, because you don't need them. I mean, they're not going to give it to you, so what? You're going to take it. You're going to do whatever it takes. Do you hear me? You are not going to play by the rules. You're going to go your own way. You're going to do what they won't do. You're going to be smart. You are going to cut corners, and you are going to win. They're on the 35th floor. You're going to be on the 50th floor. You're going to be looking down on them. And the higher you rise, the more they're going to hate you. Good. You rub their noses in it. You make them suffer. Because you don't matter all that much to them. So what? Screw them. Remember, the winner takes it all.
So, number 10 on my list is the season 4 finale winner. Yes, this was a really, really powerful episode. It dealt with sort of Saul's mindset, or Jimmy at this stage. He becomes Saul at the end of the episode. But it comes with his mindset about again, wanting to be the winner, wanting to be on top. And this is why in season 5, when Howard offered him a job at HHM, he's totally beyond that at this stage. He has a resentment towards Chuck. He has a resentment towards Howard. He doesn't like the fact that he's being forced to be in this charity group, but he really is outruled by, the other members of the board, and he's just a token member, and he wants to give the award to a young girl who had a checkered past, who committed a crime in the past, but of course they all completely, ruled her out immediately because of that. And then he has that nice speech to her where he tells her that no one's going to give her anything, they're always going to hold it against her, and that she needs to be better and she needs to be a winner. And it's obvious when he's talking to her, he's really talking about himself as well. And you see him later like crying in the car and bashing the dashboard. It was so amazing, and it's such a good scene. And then, of course, he's still dealing with trying to get his law license back. He wants to be. It's been a year, so he wants to be reinstated, and he found out that he wasn't going to be reinstated because he's not showing sympathy for his brother. So him and Kim set up these events and stand by Chuck's grave, and he writes this convincing speech for the board, but then throws the speech out the window and makes this really impassionate thing about how he needs to do it for Chuck, and how Chuck believed in it and never really believed in him, and he wants to honor Chuck's memory. And Kim was won over by this and thought it was genuine, but he was bullshitting, and because he's still in denial about Chuck's death, and still is refusing to face the consequences of what he did by getting the insurance to drop him, which again he doesn't really face until the very end of the show, but at this stage he's in denial. It's like, oh, those suckers actually believed what I said, and you see the look on Kim's face because she believed it too. And how he instantly is like changing his name. It's funny because one of the things he said in his speech is, "Oh yes, now she'll continue and honor the name McGill." And the first thing he does is change his name to Saul Goodman. Saul Goodman, and that was just that was so powerful. But then you also get another very powerful storyline with the Werner and the German workers when it comes to a head when Werner escaped to try to meet up with his wife, which is not such a good thing. Lalo finds out about this, tries to track him down. This is when he kills the young man working at the travel agency, trying to find where Werner's at. Thankfully, Mike gets to him first, but he's none too pleased, and Gus orders his death. And Mike isn't on board with this. He tries to convince Gus otherwise. We can see that Gus will not be convinced. And so Mike agrees that if someone's going to do it, and someone is going to do it, it might as well be him. And we see him having to kill someone he considers a good man and a friend. And God, that was just such a heartbreaking, powerful scene.
I opened Lalo's gate, and I would do it again, and I'm glad what they did to him. He's a soulless pig, and I wish I killed him with my own hands. And you know what else, Hector? I put you in that chair. Oh yeah, your heart meds. I switched them for sugar pills. You were dead and buried, and I had to watch this asshole bring you back. So when you are sitting in your shitty nursing home and you're sucking down on your Jell-O night after night for the rest of your life, you think of me.
So number 9 on my list is Rock and Hard Place from season 6. This is Nacho's big departure from the show, and what a very powerful episode it was. Now with the Jimmy and Kim storyline, we get more of them trying to run the con against Howard, and making plans for that. I believe this is when they have a meeting with Cliff, and Jimmy pretends to be Howard, and in order to make it look like he's throwing a hooker out of the car. But really, why I love this episode so much is the Nacho storyline, which we have, and again, the actor who plays Nacho is freaking amazing, and we get some really great performances from him in this episode, particularly when he calls his father, and his father doesn't realize that he's saying goodbye, that he's going to die, but Nacho knows he's going to die, but he can't tell him, and you see, the tears coming to his eyes and look on his face. It's just so heartbreaking. It is so heartbreaking. And then he does make a deal with Mike to turn himself into Gus, and Gus's men are being assholes about it, but Mike wants to honor Nacho with a glass of liquor, and that was just really touching. But then you get the end. The ending, of course, was absolutely amazing, where Gus brings Nacho in front of Juan Bolsa and the Salamancas, and Nacho agrees to, of course, make it clear that Gus wasn't involved in order to, save his father and do what's right. And he confesses to hating the Salamancas, and I think this confession was absolutely 100% sincere. How he says, "I hated being around you crazy fucks," and in the way he tears into Hector and confesses being the one who switched his pills and put him in that chair. It's like, whenever you sip through your straw, you think of me. I mean, God damn it. That was one of the most powerful moments in the whole show. So, yes, really great episode.
Bernalillo County has my affidavit. It's up to the district attorney whether to prosecute. And she may not.
Why?
There's no physical evidence. No remaining witnesses other than my ex-husband, assuming he's still alive.
I could
sue you in civil court. I could take everything you've got.
Yeah.
So now we're up to number 8 on my list, which is Waterworks. This is towards the end of season 6. This is where we see Kim in the future timeline for the very first time. And it kind of makes sense that she's living a very boring, ordinary life because she was very upset over what transpired with Howard's death. And she blamed herself for wanting to have fun. So it kind of makes sense that what she would do is live a life devoid of fun. That is simply boring. And we actually get the conversation of Jimmy calling her and what he actually said to her. And she told him to turn himself in. And that's what got him all pissed off and bothered. And but he reveals to her that Mike and Gus are dead, and and Lalo's dead, and no one's there to sort of go after them about Howard's death. So the first thing she does is fly to Albuquerque and confess to it, and that's just, and it shows. And after she confesses, shows she's getting more interested. She's like living again after living this dull, half dead, boring life, that she's starting to feel alive again after confessing, and goes to Howard's widow and confesses to her, even though she doesn't have to, and is opening herself up to be sued by her, where she can own Kim for the rest of her life. But Kim is willing to do that because she feels so guilty over what happened, and over the fact that even though she's not responsible for Howard's death, she is responsible for the reputation, the tainted reputation that he had gained from his death, and it's all her fault because she was having too much fun. As I said, she was the main one pushing for the con in the first place. And she's confronting her feelings over that, and then we get the scene where she's on the train, on the bus, on the airport, going back to her flight, and she just starts breaking out in tears because everything is just hitting her. God damn it! Again, one of the best performances in this show. It's absolutely amazing. But Saul, on the other hand, is still, going down the rabbit hole and dealing with the consequences of his actions of conning that guy he shouldn't have conned. He manages to get away, but Jeff gets called by the police in the scene that was quite funny when he just drives his cab straight into another car and crashes. It's Jeff's mother who figures out who Saul really is, and that's what catches him. And you see him actually threaten her life, and this is something that Saul would never do. It does show how dark he's gotten, how far he's fallen, and that he's really gone too far, and he's letting his sort of angst and anger over what happened with Kim really get the better of him. And again, but it leads to his downfall.
It was always you, right? Right back to when I passed the bar and tried to join the firm. You didn't want me. Speak up. Tell me why. It's the least you can do for me now. I'm your brother. We're supposed to look out for each other. Why were you working against me, Chuck?
You're not a real lawyer.
I'm what?
You're not a real lawyer. University of American Samoa, for Christ's sake? An online course? What a joke. I worked my ass off to get where I am. And you take these shortcuts and you think suddenly you're my peer? You do what I do because you're funny and you can make people laugh? I committed my life to this. You don't slide into it like a cheap pair of slippers and then reap all the rewards.
I thought you were proud of me.
I was. When you straightened out and got a job in the mailroom, I was very proud.
So that's it then, right? Keep old Jimmy down in the mailroom because he's not good enough to be a lawyer.
I know you. I know what you were, what you are. People don't change. You're slipping Jimmy. And Slippin' Jimmy I can handle just fine, but Slippin' Jimmy with a law degree is like a chimp with a machine gun.
The number 7 on my list is Plemento, season 1 episode that is, one of the most powerful episodes of the first episode of the show that really, really hit me. This, of course, is the episode where we get the big reveal of how Chuck really feels about Jimmy, and honestly, I did not see this coming, even though it was nicely foreshadowed. But we do see when Jimmy brings the Sandpiper case to HHM, they're very thankful and they offer him a big, payout. But Jimmy starts talking about, my office is going to be over here. And Howard's like, let's talk in private. And this is because throughout the season you get the impression that Howard's the asshole. Howard's the one keeping Jimmy down. And in fact, Chuck even puts on a facade of like, oh, Howard, how dare you do this? Is there not a way to work out? But of course, and we get this nice scene where Kim goes to Howard and is like, look, why you keep treating Jimmy like this? He deserves better. And Howard gets really pissed off at her and is like, keep your opinions to yourself because I don't care. But then he's like, stop, come back, and he realizes that he needs to actually confess to her that it's not him, it's Chuck. And then Kim goes to Jimmy and of course doesn't tell him that it's Chuck, but it says like, look, you just take the deal. Like, just do it. And when he's trying to badmouth Howard, she's like, no, Jimmy, just take the deal. And so I think that's part of why he can tell something is up. And he does some investigating and finds out that it was, in fact, Chuck who used Jimmy's phone to call Howard and tell him not to hire him. And he confronts Chuck about it, and then Chuck finally confesses in a beautiful performance, beautiful scene. We are not a real lawyer. And you find out how Chuck really feels about him. Like, slipping Jimmy with the law degree is like a chimp with a machine gun. That's just wrong. And as I said, I think you could say there's some validity to Chuck's suspicion or unease to trust Jimmy because he does still have these conning tendencies. But his purposely moving to sabotage him like this and saying you'll always be slipping Jimmy and whatnot is wrong. He should see that he's actually a good lawyer and that he actually looks up to Chuck, and if he only guided him, he could actually guide him to a right place instead of trying to attack him and saying you don't deserve to be a lawyer, which is rooted in jealousy. But I talked about that already, but damn, it's just so powerful. And then you get the Mike scenes, which were hilarious. Now, usually the Saul or Jimmy scenes are the ones that are more of the comedic relief. But in this episode, it's the Mike scene, which was brilliant. I love these scenes so much, where he starts working for that nerdy Price guy. And he's like, oh, just so we know, the agreed upon amount is agreed upon. and then we get that dude from The Walking Dead who, is being like a jerk, and it's like, oh, he doesn't even have a gun. And the way that Mike, this is where we get the title of the episode, Plemento. He's like, what are you packing? He's like, oh, Plemento. And he, manages to beat the shit out of this guy and steal all of his guns, and he had that huge guy, they called Man Mountain. He's like, what about you? Do you want a gun? And he just runs away. Absolutely hilarious. I also love this episode for that.
I was indispensable. I kept Walter White out of jail. I laundered his money, I lied for him, I conspired with him, and I made millions. If he hadn't walked into my office that day, Walter White would have been dead or behind bars within a month. And Agent Schrader and Agent Gomez and a whole lot of other people would still be alive. Fact is, Walter White couldn't have done it without me. You got that?
So number 6 is Saul Gone, the series finale, and a very, very powerful one. Indeed, because so this is when Gene gets caught by Jeff's mother because he went too far, he went too dark, and got too careless and let his emotions get the better of him. But we see once he's in jail, he tries to Saul Goodman his way out of it and be all slick and come up with, and he hires Bill Oakley as his defense attorney. Again, love that they brought back Bill Oakley for the finale. But anyway, and he comes up with this scheme to get himself in a very light sentence in a very light prison where rich people go, like a resort type prison. And he really, plays the DA and the police by saying, "Oh, Walter White put a gun to my head and forced me to do this," and blah 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 blah. And you saw that he was having fun and he was conning, and until he realized that Kim had confessed about Howard's death. And I think this is what changed everything for him. It was a huge revelation that Kim, and this is what I will say later in the episode, that she had the strength to leave. She had the strength to get away from it all, and she had the strength to own up for her mistakes. And I think this is why Kim, I think, is the most important character in the show, at least the most important character to Jimmy, because it made him realize finally that he was just being self-destructive, and he could go to this resort prison, but he'll just continue being self-destructive. He'll just continue being in denial, and he finally faced up to what he's done, and mainly facing up to the fact that he was responsible for his brother's death, and facing that guilt that he'd been denying this whole time. And it was absolutely great how he conned Kim into showing up by pretending like he was going to turn her in, but in fact he just wanted her to be there to see his confession. And again, he started out the same with, Walter White dragged me out in the desert, put a gun to my head, but then went in a different direction, the truth, where he actually said, I was the strength, I was the power behind Walter White. He probably would have died or got arrested within a month had it not been for me. I'm responsible for all the shit that he did. And again, of course, Bill Oakley is like, I want to recuse myself from this case. It's funny. But yeah, that was so powerful. And to see that the moment of redemption, you get a few really powerful flashbacks as well that do honor to the show that came before, and also have relevance about him talking about time travel, but basically has this conversation with Walter White shows that he's really talking about regrets, and that's what this episode's about him facing his regrets, and because the answers he gives to Walter White and Mike about his regrets are bullshit answers, like, oh, I regret I hurt my knee or some bullshit. But in the actual episode, you see, he regrets what he did to his brother, and he regrets that he didn't try harder with his brother, and that's why it ends with the scene with his brother when they were still good, where they were still being good to each other, where they were still close and being good brothers. And you have Chuck bring out the book, The Time Machine, that shows that goes to the theme of regrets. And then the powerful ending where he does go to jail and Kim goes to meet him there and just honors him. And they had the scene where they sit there and smoke like they always did in the first couple seasons and just stand there in silence. And she's just like, so 85 years, huh? and how much she respects him for finally owning up to what he's done. And facing really dire consequences for it too, and not trying to weasel out of it. It was, the perfect ending for this show.
You think this is bad? This chicanery? He's done worse. That's Billboard. Are you telling me that a man just happens to fall like that? No, he orchestrated it. Jimmy. He defecated through a sunroof. And I saved him. I shouldn't have. I took him into my own firm. What was I thinking? He'll never change. He'll never change. Ever since he was 9, always the same. Couldn't keep his hands out of the cash drawer. But not our Jimmy. Couldn't be precious Jimmy. Stealing them blind. And he gets to be a lawyer? What a sick joke. I should have stopped him when I had the chance. And you have to stop him.
So then we get into number 5 on my list, which is chicanery. Of course, an all-time classic where Kim and Jimmy do finally use their plan to outdo Chuck, who's trying to take away Jimmy's law license. And they do this by having, a Perry Mason moment to get Chuck to confess everything and to expose himself as being unhinged and obsessed with his, destroying his younger brother, which is true. It exposes his jealousy, exposes all the stuff that Kim said about him, and it exposes to him, and in some ways, he does do Chuck a favor by making him aware of the fact that his condition is psychological, not physical. However, he undermines any favors he does him in a later episode, by sabotaging his insurance, getting him, kicked out of the firm. But that's, another story. But the episode itself, of course, is very, very courtroom drama-ish, which just Better Call Saul doesn't do very often, but this is a very good one. And as I said, a very clever one, too, where they use Huel to plant a dead battery on Chuck, and so to reveal that he is not, in fact, his condition is, in fact, just psychological, which puts his mental well-being in question. And when he explodes and talks about how you have to stop Jimmy, and he's bringing up stuff from his childhood by, he stole from the parents and he defecated in the sunroof and whatnot, and it proves that Chuck is holding a grudge against Jimmy, which totally makes his case that this is more of, and what Kim was arguing for in the first place, that this was just a spite, a fight between two brothers. This was a family feud and not really, anything that Jimmy should be disbarred for. And it was very clever. I thought it was awesome. It was, one of the still, especially Michael McKean's performance, absolutely amazing. Still one of the best moments of the entire show.
But yes, I will land on my feet. I will be okay. But you? Far from it. You too. You two are soulless. Jimmy, you can't help yourself. Chuck knew it. You were born that way. But you, one of the smartest and most promising human beings I've ever known. And this is the life you choose.
All right, you're too tight to drive. I'm calling you.
Oh, good. Phony compassion. No, very, very believable, but I'm far from done.
Oh, no. You are done, Howard. Sorry, but you need to stop this now, and you need to go home.
You're perfect for each other. You have a piece missing. I thought you did it for the money, but now it's so clear. Screw the money. You did it for fun. You get off on it. You're like Leopold and Loeb, two sociopaths.
All right. So then, coming in at number 4, Plan and Execution from Season 6. Extremely powerful episode, which deals with the conclusion of Jimmy and Kim running the scam on Howard, how they successfully pull it off. But it has a different feel than chicanery, because you kind of see that this was not a very good thing to do, and you see that Kim had actually sort of fallen and become corrupt because she had a choice to go if it was really about her pro bono work, she could have went to Santa Fe and got a charity to fully fund her pro bono work. And she could have done that and just abandoned the scam, and the scam would have fallen apart. But she proved that the scam was more important for her. It was more important to get Howard. And that's really exposing her dark side. And again, is showing as soon as their plan works and Howard is humiliated, she starts having sex with Saul, proving, showing that how lustful she gets, and what Howard says at the end of this episode is absolutely 1000% correct. She gets off on running scams. That's why she does it. And in fact, I think Howard sort of he was blaming Jimmy all along. Oh, Jimmy's after me and Jimmy's running his typical scam. But really, it was Kim who's the mastermind behind this. And I think even at the end, he still throws more blame at Jimmy than he necessarily deserved. So it was really clever, really interesting seeing the whole scam play out with, the judge with the weird mustache and bring the film students back again, and everything work out. But then you get the punch of the episode where Howard confronts Kim and Jimmy about it, and he's absolutely 1000% correct. He also brings up the fact that, oh yeah, don't worry about poor old Howie, he'd be okay, and talk about how his life isn't like so grand, and how he's dealing with all of his own issues, like his marriage falling apart, and how they don't realize that he's got his own personal shit going on. And I think Kim did very much judge him unfairly, and was treating him unfairly by going after him like this. And so that was a very powerful scene. But then, of course, the Lalo storyline crashes into this, where he is just returned to Germany and is trying to find proof that Gus is working against the cartel. And he does find the proof in the underground facility laboratory that they were building, but he is too guarded, and he can't figure out a way to get in there, so he comes up with a way, and that's by showing up at Saul and Kim's house and shooting Howard in the head, just because he was a bystander who was at the wrong place at the wrong time and does it to make a point, which again is goddamn what a powerful moment.
You know she's the best choice.
No, I'm not. I can't. I can't do it.
She can do it. You know she can
Jimmy,
do it.
I'll
You know
stay.
I'm
Stop.
right.
Just stop.
Listen.
Just stop it.
Oh my
Shut
God,
up.
okay,
Shut
fine, yeah,
up.
her, whatever. Give her the keys, give her the address, let's go.
You gotta go. Come on. Hey. Let's go.
So then we get into my number 3, point and shoot. In fact, the very next episode of the one I was just talking about, that carries on the storyline where Lalo has Saul and Kim captive, and tells Saul to go over to Gus's house and shoot him in the head. And you see Saul convinces him to have Kim do it instead. And of course, Kim at first is like absolutely, totally against that. It's like, no, don't do it. And like, again, the acting's absolutely amazing, showing just how much of a panic these two people would be. But you see, at first I thought like Jimmy was being despicable and thinking only of himself and putting Kim in danger, but really, and this is actually played brilliantly by the way he says, go, just go. He's trying to save her. He's trying to get her out of this dangerous situation, get her away from Lalo, and that's why he wanted her to go. And I think she realizes this and God, that was just so powerful and so intense when Kim was driving towards Gus's house and there's a police pulling up. You can see her contemplating, should I tell them or should I not tell them? But of course, this was never Lalo's plan in the first place. This is why he changed his mind from Jimmy to Kim, because it didn't matter. Because he knew they wouldn't succeed. He knew that Mike and everyone would have, Gus well protected. The whole point was to distract them, was to keep Gus and his men off guard, and make him think that Lalo was at Saul's apartment. But as soon as Kim left, Lalo left. And went to his real goal, which was the laboratory under the laundry. And Gus figures this out, but I think he does something stupid by just going to investigate himself instead of telling Mike, which nearly gets him killed as Lalo gets the better of him. But then Gus does end up getting the better of Lalo and killing him. And then Gus has his own confession, similar to what Nacho did in other episodes, where he confessed how much he hates Don Ilario and the cartel. But of course, on the videotape, that would never see the light of day. But still, that was another powerful moment. And then you get the aftermath of Kim and Jimmy being reunited, which is very powerful. But then Mike sort of sitting them down and letting them know what's what, and basically that the story that they were making up for Howard being a drug addict, is now what they're going to go with. So now he's going to be stuck with that a reputation for the rest of time because of what they did. And they never meant it to be that permanent. They meant it just to be something temporary that just people forgot about and they moved on. But because Howard was killed, they ruined him and them dealing with that. And yeah, it was just so powerful.
No offense, but you need to get your house in order.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really. If you don't trust your men with your money, you have bigger problems than if you trust Saul Goodman. And for the record, he doesn't lie. Not to me, not to his clients. He's telling you the truth. But next time you have a bunch of money and no one you can trust, leave him out of it, okay? Try a wire transfer. Try a shell company, or you've heard of the Cayman Islands, right? Jesus, get your shit together and stop torturing the one man who went through hell to save your ass.
So now we get into my number 2 favorite episode of Better Call Saul, which is Bad Choice Road from season 5. This deals with the aftermath of Saul being trapped in the desert with Mike and Bagman. And at the very start of the episode, we get what I think one of my favorite montages, my favorite montage of the show, not one of the best montage of the show, that brings me to tears every time I see it. And this is a motif they've been doing throughout the show, where they'd do a split screen, have Jimmy on one side and Kim on the other. And a lot of times they would do this to show how dull their relationship is and how it's falling apart. But in this case, they're doing it to show how worried Kim is and how terrified she is that Saul's dead. And we see Saul wandering through the desert, drinking his own pee. And then we get the moment where Jimmy finally gets reception and calls Kim, and you see on Kim's side of the phone ring, she picks it up, and he's just all, "It's me," and the look of utter relief and on her face when she starts crying, that brings me to tears. And the music they had involved with it's just such a beautiful sequence. I think is easily the best montage. It's definitely a strong reason why this episode lands at number 2 for me. But then you have the rest of the episode, which deals with the aftermath of the Bagman situation, where Jimmy is experiencing PTSD, and how emotional this episode is, and how powerful it is, and how suspenseful it gets later on. We get one of the funniest moments in the whole show, in my opinion, where Saul apparently does very bad at a court case in Bill Oakley. Again, I love Bill Oakley, how he's just taunting him. It's like, wow, I've never seen someone snatch defeat out of the hands of victory so easily. He's just taunting him. It's like, wow, you really sucked. You lost so badly. And of course, you gotta feel bad for poor Jimmy because he's experiencing PTSD. He's just been through something traumatic, but it's still such a funny moment seeing Bill taunt him and Jimmy goes into the stairway to hide, and Bill follows him and puts his head on the window and is like, don't worry, you're still a lawyer. Oh my god, it's such a funny scene. But then you had the moment where Mike confronts him and tries to get him to come to terms with what happens, and then about the bad choice road. But then Saul regurgitates this to Kim in a not so good way towards the end of the episode, because Kim decides to quit Mesa Verde, which he's not. He thinks is a losing. It goes against his sort of mentality of being a winner that she's being a loser. But then this argument's cut short with Lalo showing up, where he suspects that Saul was up to something else in the desert, which of course he was, but he's not allowed to tell Lalo at all about Mike or Gus or any of that. And so he keeps pushing Saul, and it was a very intense, very suspenseful scene, especially you have Mike across the hall with a sniper rifle, and when Kim stands up to Lalo and starts yelling at him, I truly feared for her life, because I didn't, at this stage, of course, didn't know what happened to Kim, because we just noticed she's not around in Breaking Bad times. So is she gonna die? I don't know. And God, it was just such a powerful scene, and again, amazing performance, where Kim just stands up and just tells him what's what. And he actually, I think she mainly hits on the fact that Lalo can't trust any of his men. And I think this actually hits home with him. And he ends up leaving. And goddamn, that was just so intense. Such a great scene. It's just an amazing episode all around.
Hey, I love you.
I love you too. But so what?
No, Kim, you're wrong. This is about Howard. Okay, what happened to him wasn't on us. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't my fault. It was that fucking Lalo Salamanca. That psychopath came back from the dead and he walked through that door. He did this, not us, him.
I knew.
You knew what?
I knew he was alive.
No, you didn't.
It was about a month ago. I saw that car following me again. And it turned out that Mike Ehrmantraut had guys watching both of us, watching for Lalo.
Mike told you that Lalo was alive. And you didn't tell me?
Jimmy, I thought it was a 1 in a million chance that he'd come for us. I thought he would be caught if he did. And I told myself I was protecting you. But that's not the truth. The real reason I didn't tell you was because I knew what you'd do.
What would I do?
You'd blame yourself. You'd fear for me. You'd want us to run and hide until you were sure I was safe. You would pull the plug on the scam, and then... we'd break up. And I didn't want that. Because I was having too much fun.
So finally, we've come to my number one favorite episode of Better Call Saul, which is Fun and Games. The season 6 episode that carries on after the events of Howard's death. And deals with the aftermath of that. And now some people would say that this is just, a wrap-up episode, but for me, this is the most powerful episode of the show. Because it really, mainly, I think I more of latch on to the Jimmy and Kim relationship most of all in this show, which is why I chose a lot of Kim-centric episodes. But what really hits me, because this is the big reveal, because this is something that people have been wondering. There's been many theories about what happens to Kim, because we know that she's not around during Breaking Bad times. And I guessed correctly, and as very vaguely, of course, I didn't get any specifics right, but just in a very vague sense, guessed correctly that Kim was not dead, or she wasn't in jail, that basically she left him and moved elsewhere, which was my guess. And so I was very vague. I didn't get any of the specifics right, but still. And it was really powerful seeing that play out. And the way first of all, they wrapped up the Mike storyline with a really nice scene with Mike and Nacho's dad, where Mike is, told Nacho's dad about his son being dead, which is a fucking powerful scene. But then Mike was just like, don't worry, those gangsters are going to get their come up and still get what they deserve. And Nacho's dad's like, he said justice is what he said. And Nacho's dad's like, that's not justice. You gangsters and your justice, I want no part of it. It's just so good. And it really shows you that Nacho's dad was the real, smart one of the show, basically. The one who knows to stay away from all this bullshit. And Mike's just confused. And this sort of is a nice way to go into his Breaking Bad storyline, which we know ends in his death because he's too caught up in all this bullshit. And then Gus, of course, they wrap up his storyline about how he was, hitting on this guy, but he left him because he started to realize the hate that he has towards Salamancas, and the cartels got the better of him, and he's just too engulfed in his hate and need for revenge to actually live a life. And again, that feeds into what will happen to him in Breaking Bad. Well, he will die as well because of this. But the main thing is the why this episode is so great is the resolution to Jimmy and Kim's storyline. This is basically the end of this. It is a finale in the way of the prequel storyline, because after this we go forward to the Gene storyline and then have some flashbacks that take place during the Breaking Bad era. But this is basically the end of the prequel timeline, and it was a very powerful one, because first of all, you see how traumatized Kim has been over this, and over the fact that her little fun and games scam on Howard, that, as I said, she was the main one running it. She was the one gunning for this. She totally gave up this charity that she could have had so that she could do the scam. And how that led to ruining Howard's reputation. His death. He wouldn't have been there at their house arguing with them if they never ran the scam. But still, that's more indirect. That's not really directly her fault, but the fact that everyone thinks he's a drug addict and she has to perpetuate that lie is her fault and is something she has to live with. And this, in fact, when they're at the party and they have to talk to Howard's widow, and she interrogates Saul and Kim because she doesn't believe that Howard's a drug addict. She thinks that something's up because Howard did mention to her before he died that Jimmy was kind of trying to con him. And they continue to lie, and she comes up with a lie about how she caught Howard doing cocaine one night and didn't say anything, and now she wished she had. And then they go to the parking garage, and you can tell, and Saul, and this is a credit to the relationship, that Jimmy can instantly tell how bothered she is by this. And he was like, yes, I know that was rough, but we're through it now. But of course, I think at this stage she had already decided that she needs to get the fuck out of there, and she gives Jimmy a really passionate kiss, and then Jimmy, I think it was obvious to me as a viewer, but Jimmy obviously, was not aware of this and was probably purposely being intentionally obtuse. Did not realize that was a goodbye kiss, and that was very clearly a goodbye kiss. And then we get the big breakup scene, which I think is the best breakup scene ever put to film ever. One of the most powerful, where Kim quits the law at first, and he comes in yelling and saying, "Oh, we gotta get you back in the law. We can fix this." But then he goes in the bedroom and sees she has all her stuff packed. It's just, and it was so powerful how he's like, "I love you," and she says, "I love you too, but so what?" I mean, that just really hit me very hard when she said that. But then she reveals to Saul that she knew Lalo was alive and purposely didn't tell him because she didn't want the scam to be called off. She didn't want to break up and lose him because she was having too much fun. And again, this is probably the best performance of the entire show. The way Rhea Seehorn plays this, saying, "I was having too much fun," and like just how much venom she puts into that word. And because Howard, again, was absolutely correct that she got off on it, which is why she was doing it, and now she's paying the consequences for it. And how she just needed to get the hell out of there because of that. And also how she pointed out that they're not good for each other, that people get hurt when they're around each other. And they do have a very unhealthy relationship. So this is something that was made very clear throughout the show. And so, yeah, for me, this was the highlight of the show. This was the show at its most powerful. And not only that, it was absolutely a stroke of brilliance how they hard cut from this really emotional, really tragic breakup scene. They hard cut from that to a couple of years later when Jimmy is full on Saul Goodman, where he's like sleeping with a prostitute, living in this huge mansion with a golden toilet, and talking on the phone like they're doing his Saul Goodman shit, really, doing his lawyering, bullying, evil, scummy, slimy lawyer shit that we saw him do in Breaking Bad. And then we see him at his office as Saul Goodman in Breaking Bad. And the reason why this is so brilliant is because they make it tragic. And this is something like the actors themselves were hinting at. Like Bob Odenkirk was talking about how he dreaded catching out the Breaking Bad times because Jimmy McGill was a really good, caring character, and he knew it was leading someplace dark. He knew it was that he would turn into the slimy, scummy lawyer Saul Goodman, and they did, the way they played it did play out very much like a tragedy, especially the way they hard cut from the breakup, and we see again how directly affected how Saul was from that breakup, that it basically killed his soul. And so we see him where he's now soulless and doesn't care about anything or anyone. And that's brilliant. This is one of the main reasons why it's my favorite episode of the show. It was just absolutely brilliant how they took something that was inevitable, something we knew would happen from the very first episode because we saw Breaking Bad already, and they made it a very tragic, very powerful, very emotional moment. And it's just brilliant. That is all I'll say. That is my favorite episode of Better Call Saul. Fun and games. Thanks so much for watching my top 25 favorite episodes of Better Call Saul. This does conclude my coverage of Better Call Saul. If you haven't checked out my earlier videos where I went season by season to review every episode of the season, you can check that out on my channel. Be sure to check out my channel as I continue to do videos on shows like Star Trek, Ahsoka, Lower Decks, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.